I applied to YC 12 times and only got one interview. Applied for dozens of other founder programs and scout programs in SF, rejected from all of them. Decided that SF can't identify talent without relying on elite credentials, thought it was a vulnerability, now exploiting it. I saw this post today and I thought as a 7-time YC reject, I would chime in on it with my own experience and my own thoughts. After all, I do have my own post on Twitter about how I've been rejected by YC 7 times, and this is all the stuff I did in spite of being rejected. And the short answer to why I think I was rejected 7 times is mostly because I've just been doing the wrong things. And the long answer is that there's a lot of factors at play here. I started off in 2019 with my first YC application ever. Me and a friend randomly decided to apply to it 2 days before the batch started. We had never even heard of it before. And within 24 hours of applying, we got the news that we actually got an interview and we had to fly in. This was before they did the interviews remotely. So we flew in a day before the batch started. And the whole idea was if we got in, we would simply just start the batch. And if we didn't, we wouldn't. And after talking with 3 partners for around 10 minutes, we were deemed not fit to join the program, and we didn't. Back then, it was an idea that we had just sort of come up with on the spot. We didn't have any real conviction for it. And I think what they looked for back in that era is a lot different than what they look for today. Because like Matt said, I think back then it might have been more skewed towards elite credentials. We both had worked at really good companies in Silicon Valley, especially my co-founder who had a pretty star-studded resume. And I think that's what got our foot through the door. And when they saw we didn't really know what we were talking about, they weren't ready to take us on. But fast forward to around 2023, 2024, when I started applying again, things were a lot different. At first, I applied with my esports startup, which if you know esports, it's quite niche. And the first principle I think of modern day YC is that your idea has to be sort of broad and in a large enough market that if you were to capture a significant amount of it, you would lead to a multi-billion-dollar outcome. This is known TAM, or the total addressable market. If your TAM is less than $1 billion, that means a $1 billion outcome for your company, which is what they look for because that's how investors operate. They spread. And even if 99 out of 100 of those companies fail, if one of them does extremely well, like a post $1 billion exit, you make money on the batch. So when I started applying again in 2023 with my esports company, it was pretty clear that the TAM was just not there, especially because we pretty much saturated the entire market with our product and we were not making more than 5 digits in MRR. And that is probably one of the most important lessons I learned starting a startup, which is you could do something that is extremely hard or put some of the most crazy code out there and build some of the craziest things. When it comes to financial success, you are capped based on the industry you are playing in. If you are a gamer and have ever played a game like RuneScape, for example, some of the plugins that people code for that game are more complicated than like 90% of the startups in YC today. Yet those plugins don't make any money whatsoever and are inherently limited in how many users could possibly use it by the player base of RuneScape as a whole. Whereas there are some crazy startups where they're just so generalized and so simple that if you can strike the right balance of what people want in a large market, it doesn't really matter how much work you put into it. $10 a month from millions of people is still an enormous amount of money. So if you are playing the startup game and at least part of your incentive for playing is the financial reward at the end of it, picking the game that you play is probably one of the most important things that you can do. After I realized that and sold that company, I started picking markets that had pretty big TAM. They have old advice like you have to build things that you yourself would want. So naturally, as a content creator, I started making something for content creators. So quickly learned that when you follow broad stroke advice without actually understanding where and when to apply it, because you can't just apply it all the time, you end up doing something called cargo culting, which is sort of just like following what somebody says without understanding why they said it in the first place and what specific situations it applies to. And that has to be one of the biggest recipes for disaster, because if you don't understand why making something you would want actually applies, you're just going to make a whole bunch of random stuff that nobody else actually cares about. And more often or not, a lot of this like generalized advice you might hear from YC's podcast or Naval really do have a lot of caveats that if you didn't sort of derive advice from first principles yourself, you're just not going to understand. So the next 2 or 3 applications were all cases like that. Generalized things that on paper sort of make sense. I was, quote, a user of it and I, quote, wanted it. Yet there were a lot of things missing. Like, for example, how much do people actually need the thing that you are building? If you haven't gone out and talked to a bunch of people about what you're building, in fact, if you haven't gotten the idea of what you are building from talking to a bunch of people, you're probably on the wrong path. Because the thing is, without actually doing stuff, or as Naval says, like living in the arena, you're just building stuff based on speculation and what you think should make sense. And that's sort of what everyone does at the beginning, which is why it's so hard to find isolated ideas, because you're sort of building the thing that everyone sort of thought of to build. It just makes sense. And with the amount of people we have in the world, if you thought of an idea that just makes sense and you feel like it should exist no matter what, chances are it either already exists and the market's already being served, or the idea and the problem just aren't as great as you think it is. And that's what led to, like, I think at least 3 of those 7 rejections was despite having the pedigree of what YC looks for, which is like someone who's worked in big tech, someone who's built and actually shipped things before, someone who's had a successful exit, let's say. The school I went to wasn't very notable, but despite all of those things, I still kept getting rejected. And I realized there was a big mismatch between what we were actually building and what people wanted and sort of how we went about it as well. The second time I got an interview was actually around this time last year for the winter 25 batch. And it happened after I created a platform called Hired, which automatically ATS optimized your resume for any job you were looking for. And within a month of posting about this, I got 30,000 users on the platform using it on a daily basis. And when I applied with that, I thought we were so much ahead of where we previously were, because previously we always had an MVP but no real users. This time we went from idea to MVP to 30,000 users within just over a month. It actually did land us an interview, but by the time we took the interview, we had already pivoted. And the reason we pivoted was because the monthly recurring revenue for that type of market where job searchers are your customers is just a giant leaky bucket. When somebody gets a job, they don't have a need for your service anymore, so they cancel. And if they don't get a job, they think your service isn't working and then they cancel. So in the time that we applied to Y Combinator and got our interview, we had actually pivoted to something completely different, which means we went into that interview pitching a completely different product than what the partners saw when they gave us the interview in the first place. And as you can imagine, that didn't go very well. It took them like 3 days to let us know that we didn't get in, which makes me think there was at least some deliberation there. But in hindsight, I sort of wished we realized that the business wasn't going to work out a bit later. That way we just stuck to it and we could have showed up there being like, look at what we built. And maybe we would have gotten in and pivoted after we got in, which is actually extremely common. A lot of YC companies pivot once they get in. And that brings me to the biggest thing I think YC companies are actually looking for. While I think a lot of people in SF do try to identify talent with elite credentials, I think YC is sort of past that stage, especially now because in their eyes, the playing field for how easy it is to just create and ship something has been completely levelized. So you don't have to be like some crazy programmer from Google in order to like build and ship something like you might have had to be 6 years ago. Now what they want to see is actual traction, which is actually more in line with I think what other VCs want to see when raising a pre-seed. And I think because there are so many more people building than there were before, you just have a way larger density of people that are able to come up with an idea from a problem they've seen firsthand other people have, vibe code the shit out of it, and actually get customers for it because they're solving a real problem. And even after that application last year where we got an interview, the next 3 times we applied, we did not have that same traction. And I think that's pretty much what led to me being rejected that many times. And it was a really weird feeling for me because when I created my first startup, we sort of zeroed in on the problem really quickly and built a product that everyone ended up using. So it was really unusual to me to start building things and have this, what I consider to be an amazing product, and no real users that wanted to use it in the first place. And it really showed me that you can classify an engineer by how beautiful something they built is, but you classify how amazing a product is by how much it actually solves the problem or a problem in general. And side note, one book that really helped me with this is called The Mom Test. And the core thing it teaches you is how to talk to people, potential customers, and get their actual pain points and problems so that you can create a solution around it without trying to shove your ideas down their throat, which is how I used to operate for a long time. And if you talk to any engineer that has a solution or a product that they think could be a great startup, that's usually what they do. They tell you their product and their great solution without even trying to understand if you have the problem or what your problem is in the first place. That's such a huge mistake that a lot of engineers make, and it's why I think a lot of engineers actually make the worst founders for startups, and only like a small subset of them that don't focus fully on the engineering side of things and are actually able to focus on the customers usually are the ones that do well. I've talked to so many people that look at some founders in YC and they're like, oh, these kids, they don't know how to code. They're so young. They've never held a real job. These startups are held up by nothing but duct tape and vibe coding. And one of these days it's just going to collapse because they don't know real coding like we do. And it turns out that's actually not that important, because by the time you get to the point where all that stuff actually matters. You've raised a couple $1,000,000 and you can hire the guy from Google that is the code supremacist and believes that no startup should have bad code, and he can fix the code up while the founders keep going raising money and building things for actual people. The one common thread I've seen from all the people I've talked to in the last like 5 or 6 batches in YC is they did something random, like maybe they went and they worked for a company and saw how shitty a process was at that company. Then they vibe coded a duct tape solution, brought it to the company, made them their first customers, and realized if this company has that problem, a bunch of other companies probably have it as well. And I really think that's what it is. When Paul Graham first started YC, it was all about the people. He kept saying we invest in founders, not ideas. And I think the paradigm is the same, but the way that you show that you're a good founder is different from when Paul Graham was running it. When PG was in charge, I think social signals like where you've worked, the programming competitions you've done, I think those things were some of the only ways to prove that you were someone with agency and you can move fast and build things. In today's day and age, my mom can go on Bolt or VO and build something for her jewelry business, and it would probably be a more successful SaaS than the majority of things that engineers at companies would build if they had the chance to. And by the way, the whole idea of bouncing between idea to idea from batch to batch isn't inherently a bad thing in my opinion, but I think it shows some underlying signs of something being wrong, like not focusing on a specific industry or a field or a specific pain point, which can indicate to me that maybe it sort of feels like a bit of shiny object syndrome or trend hopping, which is also sort of a red flag. I have a lot of thoughts on that as well. Let me know if you want to cover that in another video. We'll see how my 8th application goes since I just submitted it a couple days ago. Make sure you join our Discord community if you want a bunch of other people talking about this stuff. I'll see you guys in the next video.